Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode one of our brand new podcast, Inside Data. Over the next few months, we'll be interviewing an amazing mix of authors from the data, technology, and analytics industry. And today we are joined by the one and only data whisperer, Scott Taylor. Welcome, Scott.
Hey, Mark, how are you? Episode one. Wow, thrilled
First
to be on
ever,
episode
brand
one.
spanking new.
Kicking this off here, so let's see where we go with it. Wonderful.
I'm sure most of our audience know you, Scott, to be honest with you. But before we jump into it, can you just give us a brief intro of yourself and who you are?
Absolutely, sure. Hopefully they know me. That's great if many of them do. If you don't, I'm Scott Taylor, the data whisperer. I help calm data down. I'm on the data management side of the business. Been doing that for 25 or so years, working with these iconic data companies, helping global enterprises understand the power and strategic value of proper data management. So a lot of people talk about where data ends up, data science, analytics. I talk about where data starts, which is over on the master data, reference data, metadata side of things. So every data journey's got to start somewhere, and I'm trying to help people get off on the right path.
Perfect. Excellent. Thank you. The foundations. Cool. So I've read the book. Here it is.
Oh, wonderful. Yes, sir. Yeah. All right, great. I got a copy too.
Cool.
Love to see you have. Yeah, that's wonderful. Thanks for picking it up.
No worries. No worries. Now, I thought it was great. I thought really digestible. I can see it adding a lot of value, not just to data professionals, but business professionals alike.
Oh, nice. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's applicable to other business areas, I guess. Maybe not just data management. I think lots of other people have got a story to tell or are struggling to get their story heard. I get it. It's about selling, communicating, building engagement in a much lesser talked about discipline, especially in the data field. Kind of alluded to it there a little bit, and you do talk about it in the book, but we all know data management is notoriously boring. What compelled you to write a book about it?
Because it's so important. Yes, it tends to be kind of thought of as this back office, clerical, in the weeds, highly technical, difficult to see the value versus other parts of the broader data and analytics space, like data science and analytics and visualization by its very nature is something that people can look at and see. But data management, none of those things that I talked about, data science, analytics, none of that stuff works unless the data is properly stewarded and managed that goes into it. So I really felt there was a need. There was definitely a gap in the space that I felt was important to fill around this notion of telling stories about your data. Data storytelling for data management, as the subhead of the book is, it was, all this talk about data storytelling, it was exclusively focused on analytics, on business intelligence, on the cool stuff, that sexy stuff that gets a lot of attention. And there isn't a data expert out there who doesn't realize if the data going in isn't any good, then the output's going to be terrible. So how do we tell that story in a, let's just say, a little more in-depth way than just simply garbage in, garbage out? How do we get business stakeholders, C-level leadership, the rest of the organization to realize, look, we've got to build that foundation first. And I'm out there trying to help the folks I've been dealing with my whole career get funding, get support, get engagement, get the people who don't understand why this is important to go from some level of, I don't know what the heck you're talking about, to how do we live without this? That's what we want people to get. It's like, wow, I didn't realize this was so important. We got to do something about it. That's where I'm trying to help people get in their organization.
Yeah. Okay. So why is it so, in your opinion, why is it so important to differentiate between, and you do this, you say, this is your own thing, I guess, between data and analytics when communicating that message about data?
Most people see the analytics side. They see business intelligence. They think that most of what goes into the whole data space is that output, that business output that drives action. I sit there kind of for my whole career a little bit envious and kind of on the side going, why are the analytics folks getting so much attention when they, clearly the data management people have to be their partners. And sometimes the analytics people take it a little too far. So I take kind of a tongue-in-cheek rivalry with them. And when I hear analytics people talk about, data's got no value until I put it into business intelligence, or data's just a cost center until we get our analytics stuff going. I go, why do you have to be so confrontational? Why does it have to be zero sum? I mean, you don't hear a baker say, flour has no value until I turn it into bread. It's like, no, they respect the ingredients. So I just felt like there's a little bit too much fake competitiveness between data and analytics. And so in that vein, I want to try and separate the space a little bit for the business folks to realize, no, there's two things in data. There's determining the truth, which is the foundational data management stuff. And then there's deriving meaning, which is where analytics comes in. Of course, your meaning should have truth in it. Your truth needs meaning. These two things are inextricably linked, but they are separate and need to happen somewhat separately. You got to determine the truth first before you go off and derive any meaning. Obviously, I'm on the truth team. That's the meaning of my truth hat here. But you've got to reinforce that concept that you've got to have the truth first. And I try to articulate in a really simple, business accessible way where people can't really argue with it. I mean, it's kind of hard to argue with the idea that, no, I want meaning without truth. So if I can back them into that corner, then we've made our point. We can move on from there.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Makes sense. I mean, I love the way that you continuously refer to kind of real life examples, relatable examples throughout the book, talking data, but then bringing it back to real life scenarios. I mean, it's obviously quite key in terms of communicating a message. I mean, the data lake comparison to a storage locker, I quite like that.
It's simple. I'm just trying to keep it simple. I don't know all the technical difference between a data lake and a data warehouse and data lake house. What's a data lake house? A place where my data goes on vacation. I mean, again, this kind of terminology, I just think it's a cacophony of technical babble to the business leaders who are asked to engage and fund it and support it. So if you want to communicate to the business, you got to use the language of the business. You got to use simple and not simplistic. It's not that you have to talk down to these people or they don't understand or they're not intelligent. They know a whole lot about their parts of the space, but as data becomes more important across an enterprise, they have to get accustomed to understanding some level of detail about data and why it's so important. And what I always urge folks on the data leadership side is to speak in that clear, simple language that gets the point across and explains the why. I'm all about the why. Most data folks jump into the how it's going to get done, what it is, all those other kind of aspects. I never met a business leader who's going to support something if they don't understand why it's important. So focus on that why is my constant advice.
Yeah, you're not the only author that focuses on why or starting with why.
Yeah, start with why. Exactly. Yeah. So, the popular concept for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people have to, I guess, buy the book to know exactly what we're talking about in terms of the references you make to real life. But how important, I mean, you've alluded to it there, but how important is it to I guess, not just speak a common language, but create a common language. And we hear data literacy. And data literacy is always, brought into conversation, real hot topic now, but it's still geared towards the analytics spiel. But really, data literacy means become literate about data. So how important is that ability to translate the terminology, make it more sort of consumable for business folk?
It's only important if you want your business to support it. That's my feeling. If you want your CEO to realize that what they are investing in your data program is important to the strategic direction of the business, then you better be able to explain it in a simple way. And so I think it's absolutely paramount to be able to articulate these topics in a consumable, interesting, engaging, consistent way that gets folks on the business side to realize, yes, this is important and I understand why. It also helps the rest of the data team, who tend sometimes to be pretty heads down in the integration and the application and sort of, the program execution, the technical aspects. It helps them to realize why what they are doing as a data steward, as a data architect, is important to the entire organization. So I think there's a couple of audiences. But as a data leader, if you don't build up those communication skills, those soft skills, it's going to be very difficult for you to get the support of the rest of the organization.
Yeah, makes sense. So tell me about the 4 C's and the 8 8s. What do they mean and why are they important?
I'll start with the why they're important. So the 4 C's, which you're mentioning some of the sort of frameworks I have in my book, the 4 C's, the 8 8s, the 3 phases, the 3 V's. I try this kind of pithy, easy to consume structure or framework, if you will, to help explain some of these basic data principles. Nobody should do, data modeling off of my frameworks, but it's a way to help explain it. So the 4 C's, for example, are the 4 structural elements that I think every master data record needs to have. In this case, it's code, company, category, and country. So every record needs a unique identifier. It needs some sort of parent-child relationship, which is a company. You need to know what kind of thing it is. So you need a category. And just because they all start with C, you need a country or some form of geography. But even that simple 4C explanation, if you had that on the data entities in your system, you would know where something is, what it is, who owns it, and that it's unique. And think about all the data problems that go away if you had that on your product data, on your customer data, on your vendor data, on these master data domains that so many organizations struggle with. They struggle with duplicates, hierarchies misaligned, taxonomies that don't make sense, missing geographies. Again, that's code, company, category, country. This came from my desire and in some cases, my decades of frustration in trying to break through to the business side to explain to them what the heck we are talking about. The 8 8s is the same thing. They all rhyme with 8. I don't think I can rattle them all off now. Sneepy, sneezy, dopey, doc, happy, bet. No, it's the wrong. That's 7. But the idea that you want to relate with data, you want to use data to build your relationships, you need to validate it, you need to integrate it, aggregate it, drive interoperability, interoperate, communicate. I've forgotten my own C's, my own 8s here. But this little pyramid were the 8 ways that I have found people should use data. And I haven't found a 9th one. I've challenged folks, come up with a 9th one. But all of these frameworks are there just simply to have an easy way, relatively fun way to remember and understand what I think are really important concepts in data management for any organization.
Yeah, it's kind of framework for that communication, I guess, is a good way to
as simple as that. Yeah, the 8 8s. I go, all right. So take what you're doing in an exercise in the book is take what you're doing with data and fit it into one of these 8 8s. And I'm telling you, my challenge to the readers are everything you do with data is going to fit into one of these 8 8s. Kind of a bold statement, but it gets them thinking about it. Is there a 9th one? Is there a 10th one? No, there's 8. Yeah. And again, everything, the pinnacle of this little diagram is relate. Everything you want to do with data is focused on building relationships, growing relationships, mitigating the risk of relationships. My view is if you don't have relationships, you don't have a business. So the data you've got about those relationships, most important data any organization has. So again, just trying to put some relatively simple ideas out there about an extremely complicated space.
Yeah. Like you say, dumb it down, slow it down.
Yeah.
Make it.
You can always make it more complicated. Exercise I use is, how few words can you use?
Yeah.
Can you cut that back? Can you use fewer words? Can you use less, less bullet points? How quickly and succinctly can you describe something? That takes a lot of work to sort of boil things down to their essence, to their atomic level. That's where I like to play. it can always get more complicated.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Right, I think this is possibly the most important question of the day. So did the BI and Analytics Summit really have better food than the Enterprise Information Management Summit?
Yes, it did. Yes, I think you're referring to my Gartner story there, or at least in my mind, it did. You know, I felt like we had a bunch of bologna sandwiches, and up there they were eating steak. That was certainly what I wanted people to see, that kind of even how the rest of the community treats itself. But you're referring to this story I have in the book about going to an early Gartner conference where the MDM, the data management the data management conference overlapped with the business intelligence conference, and the data management conference was literally in the basement. It was on the lower floor. You had to take 2 escalators up to the grand ballroom where the BI conference was. And probably won't go too deep into the full story, but we had a very nice keynote speaker who was from a client that Gartner had for lunch. And upstairs at the BI conference, where they were serving better food, they had Francis Ford Coppola. Okay, they had the headliners up there. So I snuck into that and got to ask Mr. Coppola, who I feel is an icon, definitely inspiration in my life. I got to ask him what makes a great story. So that was a fun thing to kind of put into the book and kind of combine my love of both storytelling and data and the conference and a bunch of fun anecdotes about that. But yes, they did have better food.
It's amazing. I mean, that's an amazing story in itself. But it's funny, isn't it? Everything that's kind of underpinning the stuff that we hear about, the BI, the analytics, the sexy stuff, data management, it's kind of, the ugly duckling, so to speak, I guess. And you kind of you paint a picture. I think it's chapter 5 in the book or something. I'm referring to the book because the interview's about the book, Scott. So I did my research.
Excellent.
But you talk about information management in relation to BI and analytics, and I don't know if you agree with this, but information management, I don't hear anyone say information management as a term. I think it's potentially died and become a bit more distinct, a bit like you say, sort of data and analytics, for example. And I guess we're in a modern world. Data privacy, AI, the COVID pandemic. I mean, we're getting data kind of thrusted in front of us via media, and people seem to understand data more and more. They seem to have more of an interest in data. But do you think that sort of the media, everything you see in the news, that sort of thing, does that help when selling data management as a concept, and as well as obviously your data story?
I think it helps at the enterprise level. I mean, I'm B2B, my audience are other businesses. I think on the consumer side, it's freaking people out. Data isn't a positive thing, unfortunately. I think in the minds of most everyday folks, they get scared of it. It's not something that they, are excited about in a positive way, unfortunately. On the B2B side, internally at companies, obviously it's a much more exciting topic, a much more positive topic in a lot of cases. And I think it's certainly COVID and the pandemic and a lot of other things have forced enterprises to work in ways they hadn't before. And the ones that had great data were able to leverage a lot of their processes better than the ones that didn't. A lot of companies were thrust into e-commerce in a way that they weren't necessarily prepared for. If their product data was good, they did okay. If their product data wasn't good, they had a lot of catching up to do. The analysts absolutely said that there was a huge uptake over the last year and a half on inquiry calls around data management, MDM, master data, reference data, metadata, all these foundational things, because people realized, if they were waiting and they knew, now's the time. I mean, if you weren't ready, if you weren't prepared, it was really hard to catch up. And I think it helped the whole category get a little more attention, have people realize that this is really serious and it's not going back. I mean, once you get hooked on really great foundational data, it's hard for you to pretend like it didn't matter anymore.
Yeah.
So a lot of the companies I've dealt with and talked to over the last couple of years have certainly validated the idea that, yeah, they're getting more attention now. They're getting more, people are realizing, oh, right, all that stuff you've been, droning on about for the last 10 years. Right, that's important. I mean, the same thing, we just almost went through a hurricane where I am here. It didn't hit. It kind of missed us. It got a couple of, a state over. But, if you were prepared, then the water didn't come flooding into your basement. It's pretty hard to kind of seal up your basement while the storm is happening. And that analogy, I think, applies to the master and reference data space. If your foundation was secure before COVID hit, you did a lot better than if it wasn't, and you're trying to patch up a bunch of holes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's an ongoing thing, isn't it? Right? It's not, you never do it and leave it. That's not the way to look at it, is it?
It's a program. It's a new way of life. A lot of the MDM consultants I talk to, people who deal with kind of enterprise implementation always bring up the cultural aspect of it, because you do have to change the way people think about data if they're all going to be part of some form of stewardship program or governance program or a data glossary program or whatever that initiative happens to be, that are all part of maintaining proper data foundation. So yeah, you've got to get it. There is a different way you've got to think about data if you want that foundational aspect to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of people say that true master data management is kind of the holy grail. Quite rare to be 100% successful off the bat, so to speak. And especially in larger companies, it's so complex. The complexity there is absolutely massive, isn't it? But more often than not, a lot of data management initiatives are spun up, aren't they, reactively to a certain problem. Do you think it's important to have a data story or multiple data stories? And should they be aligned more to the overall business objectives, or situationally specific, solving those problems?
I'll answer your last question first. Yes, it must be aligned. Your data story for data management must enable the strategic intentions of your enterprise. It must show very clearly and concretely why it's going to help the company get to where it needs to go. It can have chapters. Do you need multiple data stories? But you've got to have the simpler you can make, more consistent you can make it, the more effective it's going to be. People don't want to hear, okay, we're doing this. Oh, now we changed it. Now we're doing that. I counsel folks, and it's a lot of prep that has to go into it. Try and get that story as straight as possible before you start pushing it out there in a wide circulation. Test it out a little bit. Talk to people you don't know, who don't know anything about data, and see if they understand it in your organization. If you keep shifting the story, you're going to confuse people. I mean, part of the way you can get folks to change their mind, which is what this is really about, as you mentioned, there's a lot of sales techniques in the book, because I come from a sales background, a marketing background, a strategy background, where you need to create stories to convince somebody of the benefits of what you have to offer and take action on what you're trying to articulate. You got to have repetition. It's got to be clear. So if you keep changing it a little bit, you can tinker with it around the edges, but get that story straight up front. That means coming up with the 2 or 3 ways that it's going to help the entire organization, not 152 of them. Coming up with the simple language that maybe even mimics what your company does as a living to help people understand it. What I mean by that, I work with this global logistics company. We talk about their internal data story. Part of it is about how, okay, just like what we do for our customers, we move things from A to B. We've got to make sure it always gets there. We know the source. We know the process. We understand the value we're bringing. Same thing with data, right? Data starts here. It's got to move over there through that process. We've got to make sure to have controls and consistency. Very easy to take a leap from what they do for a living to what data needs to do for them. If you're a healthcare organization, very straightforward. Healthy data is means a healthy business, something like that. So just borrow the way your company talks about itself for your imagery rather than trying to come up with some entirely new set of analogies and ideas. It's just a couple of shortcuts for folks out there who are trying to put that data story together, and a lot of it's in the book, to help you get it off the ground instead of just starting with a total blank sheet of paper.
Yeah, makes sense.
I watched
Cool.
a guy present from the Department of Defense in the US, and he talked about how data is the payload for their business. Not everybody can use that analogy, but obviously for his world it worked well. But find that particular, take your own company's slogan, replace the word, a couple words with data, and see if that works. Kind of play with that creatively. Sometimes it's as straightforward as that. Impact.
Yeah, cool. You summarize at the end of the book a few different, I'm going to say, actual data stories. What's your favorite out of those, and why?
I don't know if I liked all of them because they sort of illustrated the way we took, in a lot of cases, a company's big strategic initiative that didn't necessarily have anything about data in it, and prove that the ideas that company was trying to execute weren't going to happen without better data. I'd say probably the scariest one in there, it's my favorite, it's one of my favorites just because it just kind of jolts people, is the one about the bank that got a $400 million fine for lack of data governance. That's the worst kind of horror story, right? The last story you want to tell is that kind of thing. Versus another organization that really took the time to look at their annual report, to look at their leadership presentations, to look at their investor day deck, and tie a lot of these big ideas to the need for data management. Those are positive ways to do it. If you only react to the negative stuff, you're always going to be playing catch up. If you are trying to also show how it enables where your company wants to grow, how it wants to improve, then you've got a much better chance of succeeding, because it's not always the negative stuff either. Mitigate risk. We don't want the CFO to go to jail. We don't want to be fined. Yes, I'm not saying those things aren't important, but if that's all you're really doing with your data management, you're missing some really big opportunities, because that same data that you managed to mitigate the risk of your company can also be leveraged to help it grow, to help it improve. And those are much more positive aspects. Those get a lot more engagement and a lot more support than just simply kind of the protection stuff, which again is important, but hopefully you can find other things you can do.
Yeah. Should you bring other people's data stories like that into your own data story to, raise it up a bit?
I think that helps. I think that helps. And it's why I tried to put some of those examples in there. If people can borrow them or find another organization, data breaches are a hot topic. Again, that's what scares the heck out of consumers about data, regular everyday people. I'm not a data security expert. Obviously, there's a lot of factors, but data management has a role in that. And, a great way to destroy your brand these days is to let your data out inadvertently, and people are very unforgiving of that sort of thing. So data management has a role in protecting your company from those kind of data breaches for sure.
Yeah.
So if you got to scare the hell out of your CFO and your management team, then go for it, because we're not, you got to be bold. You got to be strong around this, because you're also, as a data leader, you're competing with other areas of the company that actually tell better stories than data people, right? Marketing people are great at it. Salespeople, if they can't tell a story, they're not making quota. And sometimes those initiatives will get more support simply because they capture the imagination of the board or of senior leadership in a way that a data management story doesn't. A tip I have is listen to those stories, because if any of those stories have to do with doing things at scale, they need the work that data management brings to the party. You can't do something in sales at scale unless you've got great foundational data. You can't do something in marketing at scale unless you have the master data, reference data, metadata in place that supports those activities. So there's a role for the data leaders, even as part of other stories across the organization, to show, look, as a character, we can help make this work too.
Yeah, ideal. So what would be your number one piece of advice then for those that are in the middle fighting the battle for getting data management heard in their organization?
Make sure you tie it to the why. Make sure you answer those why questions. You finally get that audience with the board and you go through, your data model and all this process stuff, and somebody stops you and go, why are you telling me this? I mean, imagine having 5 minutes with your CEO, and this is an exercise. Imagine having that 5-minute conversation with your CEO, getting 30 seconds in and having them interrupt you and go, why are we even talking about this? Why is this important to me? Know that answer first. Don't make them ask that question. Start with that. They'll always ask you more. If they understand the why, then they might say, okay, so how are we going to get it done? Right. Yeah. I agree with you. How are we going to get it done? But they don't understand the how. You're not going to explain to them how you're going to build this thing. You think they care about that? That's why they hired you, to get that finished. You need to get the why question up front and answered for them, so they'll give you the money to do the work you want to do. That's what it's about. Don't forget the money. Make sure you secure that engagement by answering that why up front.
Perfect. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Scott, for your time. That's it. Wraps up. I think the last thing to do is to tell people where they can get the book. Do you want to do that, Scott, or do you want me to do it?
Absolutely. I can pitch it there. So telling your data storytelling for data management. It's mentioned here, 99% buzzword free. I didn't want to overpromise. So try to, so we just kept it at 99%. It's available on the publisher's website, technicspubs.com. If you use my promo code Data Whisperer, one word, you'll get 20% off. It's also on Amazon, depending on where you need to ship. It's doing well. My publisher's happy, and it seems to be moving along nicely. If you like any of this stuff, I got a whole bunch of videos on YouTube as well. My website is up and going, metaconsulting.com, where everything I've done over the last couple of years is there. Blogs, excerpts from the book, videos like crazy, interviews. I'll post this up here, Mark, once you get that going. And also people can find me on LinkedIn. I'm all over LinkedIn too, Scott Taylor, the Data Whisperer. So
perfect. Fantastic. All right, Scott, thanks very much. And yeah, we'll wrap things up there. Thanks.